Ma'am, if you can't control yourself, we'll have security remove you from this aircraft. Those words, spoken to a woman bleeding from her nose. A woman who had asked for help 3 times. A woman who happened to be one of the most respected medical executives in the country. What would you do if the people paid to keep you safe treated you like you were invisible, even while you were bleeding? The fluorescent lights inside Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport hummed with that particular buzz that only exists in places where thousands of people pass through every day without really seeing each other. It was December 31st, 2019, New Year's Eve. The air smelled like coffee cinnamon rolls and the faint chemical sweetness of industrial cleaning products. Gate B-27 was packed with travelers eager to get home before midnight, their voices blending into a constant murmur of anticipation and impatience. Simone Carter sat in the plastic chair near the window, her laptop balanced on her knees. She was 42 years old, with smooth, dark skin and hair pulled back in a simple twist. She wore a charcoal blazer over a cream blouse, comfortable slacks and flats that had seen better days. Nothing about her screamed wealth or status. That was intentional. She had learned a long time ago that the quieter she dressed, the more clearly she could see how people really behaved. Beside her, resting against her leg, was a worn leather bag, caramel-colored with a brass clasp that had been repaired twice. The stitching along one side was slightly uneven where her mother had fixed it herself nearly 20 years ago. Dr. Eleanor Carter had carried that bag through 3 decades of medical practice, through countless hospital shifts, through the quiet indignities that came with being a black woman doctor in America. She had carried it until the day she died, and now Simone carried it for her. Simone glanced at the departure board. Flight 847 to Los Angeles. Boarding in 20 minutes. She felt a small flutter of anticipation in her chest. Her daughter Naomi was waiting at home, probably already planning how they would watch the ball drop together, eating takeout Thai food and laughing at the year behind them. 15 years old, and already smarter than Simone had been at twice that age. She smiled at the thought. The laptop screen glowed with emails. Simone was the CEO of MedTech Solutions, a medical technology company she had built from nothing into a $200 million enterprise. They developed diagnostic software that helped rural hospitals identify strokes, faster algorithms that had saved thousands of lives across the country. The company employed over 300 people and had partnerships with hospitals in 47 states. But tonight, she was not a CEO. Tonight, she was just a tired woman who wanted to get home to her kid. Her phone buzzed. A text from Naomi. "Mom, did you board yet? I already ordered the pad Thai. Extra spicy like you like it. Also got spring rolls and that mango sticky rice you pretend you don't like, but always eat all of." Simone smiled and typed back quickly. "Not yet, baby. 20 more minutes. Save me some of everything. And I don't pretend. I just don't want you to think I'm predictable." 3 dots appeared, then Naomi's reply. "Mom, you've ordered the same thing from the same restaurant for like 5 years. You're the most predictable person I know. Love you." Simone laughed softly to herself. The sound felt good, felt normal. She slipped the phone back into her pocket and returned her attention to the laptop, scrolling through the final notes from the medical conference she had just attended. 3 days of presentations, panels, and networking. 3 days of smiling and shaking hands and pretending she was not exhausted. The conference had been a success, her keynote speech well received, but she was ready to be done. Ready to be home. A boarding announcement crackled through the speakers. Simone closed her laptop and slipped it into the leather bag, her fingers brushing against the worn clasp. She stood, stretched her back, and joined the line forming at the gate. The man behind her was talking loudly into his phone about some deal that was going to make him a fortune. His voice grated against her ears, too loud, too confident, too certain that everyone around him wanted to hear about his success. He gestured wildly as he spoke, nearly hitting Simone with his elbow. She stepped aside without comment. The woman ahead of her had 3 carry-on bags and kept asking the gate agent if she could board early because she had a connection, even though this was a direct flight. Simone waited patiently, her boarding pass ready, her expression neutral. When she reached the front of the line, the gate agent barely looked at her. She scanned the boarding pass, nodded once, and turned to the next passenger. Simone walked down the jetway, her footsteps echoing against the textured flooring. The transition from the bright lights of the terminal to the dim tunnel always felt like crossing a threshold, stepping from one world into another. The aircraft was a Boeing 737, older but well-maintained. The overhead bins were already filling up as passengers squeezed down the narrow aisle, bumping into each other with muttered apologies. The air inside was thick with the smell of recycled oxygen and the faint tang of cleaning solution. Someone had spilled coffee somewhere, and the sweet, bitter scent lingered in the background. A child was crying near the front of the plane, and a harried mother was trying to calm him with a juice box and whispered promises. Simone found her row. 23C. Window seat. She preferred the window. Something about being able to look out at the clouds, at the world shrinking below, always calmed her. It reminded her that the problems of the ground were temporary, that there was always a bigger picture. She slid into her seat and tucked the leather bag beneath the seat in front of her, making sure the clasp was visible. Old habit. Her mother had always said that you never knew when you might need to grab your things and run. The advice had been born from experience, from decades of navigating spaces where Black women were not always welcome, not always safe. The middle seat was already occupied by a man in his 50s with thinning blonde hair and a polo shirt stretched tight across his stomach. He was reading something on his phone, his elbow spilling over the armrest into her space. When Simone sat down, he glanced up and his expression shifted. It was subtle, a tightening around the eyes, a slight lean away from her. He pulled his laptop bag closer to his body, adjusting it so it was pressed against his far hip. His fingers curled around the strap protectively. Simone noticed. She always noticed. The small gestures, the unconscious adjustments, the way people rearranged themselves when she entered a space. She had been noticing these things since she was a child, since she first understood that the color of her skin meant something to people who did not know her, meant something before she ever opened her mouth. But she said nothing. Instead, she buckled her seatbelt, adjusted the air vent above her head, and closed her eyes for a moment, willing the tension out of her shoulders. It was New Year's Eve. She was going home. She would not let a stranger's discomfort ruin her night. The aisle seat remained empty for another few minutes. Eventually, an older woman with silver hair and a kind face settled in, offering Simone a warm smile. Her eyes crinkled at the corners, and there was something gentle about her, something that made Simone relax slightly. "I always hate this part," the woman said, gesturing at the crowded aisle. Everyone trying to find their seats at once? It's like a puzzle no one knows how to solve. Simone smiled. It does feel that way sometimes. I'm Beatrice, the woman said, extending her hand. Beatrice Holloway, retired kindergarten teacher from Pasadena, 43 years in the classroom. Now I just travel to see my grandchildren and spoil them rotten before sending them back to their parents. Simone shook her hand. The grip was firm, but gentle. Simone Carter. Nice to meet you. Carter. Beatrice repeated thoughtfully. That's a good, strong name. You have family in Los Angeles, my daughter. She's 15, waiting for me to get home so we can ring in the new year together. Beatrice's face lit up. Oh, that's lovely. 15 is such a wonderful age. They're becoming their own people, but they still need their mothers. Treasure these moments, dear. They go by so fast. Simone nodded, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. She thought of Naomi, of the way her daughter rolled her eyes at her corny jokes, but laughed anyway, of the way she still wanted to curl up on the couch and watch movies together, even though she was technically a teenager now. Beatrice was right. These moments were precious. The cabin doors closed with a heavy thunk. The safety demonstration began, the flight attendants moving through the familiar choreography of exits and oxygen masks and flotation devices. Simone watched out of habit, noting the exits, counting the rows to the nearest one. 6 rows back. Emergency exit over the wing. She had done this so many times it was automatic, a ritual of preparation that had become second nature. The plane taxied, then accelerated, then lifted into the air. Simone watched Atlanta shrink beneath them, the lights of the city becoming a grid of gold and white against the darkness. The highways looked like veins of light pulsing with traffic even at this hour. She thought about Naomi probably sitting cross-legged on the couch right now, scrolling through her phone, waiting for her mother to land. The thought made her heart ache with longing. The plane climbed through layers of cloud, the cabin shuddering slightly with turbulence before smoothing out. The captain's voice came over the intercom, welcoming them aboard, announcing the flight time, wishing everyone a Happy New Year. A few passengers cheered softly. Someone in the back laughed. Simone leaned her head against the window and let her eyes close. Just a short rest. Just enough to take the edge off the exhaustion. The conference had been 3 days of constant motion, constant performance. She was tired in a way that went beyond physical fatigue. She was tired of being on, of being watched, of being the only black woman in rooms full of white faces. She was tired of smiling when she wanted to scream, of nodding when she wanted to argue, of pretending that she did not notice the subtle condescension in people's voices. But that was the price of success. That was what her mother had taught her. You work twice as hard to get half as far, Eleanor used to say, and you never let them see you sweat. Simone had followed that advice her entire life. She had graduated valedictorian of her high school class, summa cum laude, from Howard University, top of her class at Johns Hopkins Medical School. She had built a company from nothing, had saved lives, had created jobs, had done everything right. And still she noticed the way people looked at her. Still she felt the weight of their assumptions pressing down on her shoulders. But not tonight. Tonight, she was just going home. 30 minutes into the flight, Simone woke with a start. The pain hit her like a hammer. Sharp, sudden, concentrated behind her left eye. She gasped, her hand flying to her temple, pressing against the skin as if she could push the pain back inside. At first, she thought it was just a tension headache. She had been working long hours all week preparing for the conference. Her neck was stiff, her shoulders tight. Tension headaches were familiar companions, old enemies she knew how to fight. She reached into her bag and found a small bottle of ibuprofen, shaking 2 pills into her palm and swallowing them dry. The bitter taste coated her tongue. She closed her eyes and waited for the medication to work. But the pain did not fade. It sharpened, became a pulse, then a throb. Then something worse, something that felt like pressure building inside her skull, like a balloon being inflated in a space too small to contain it. Simone opened her eyes. The cabin lights had dimmed, and most passengers around her were settling in for the 5-hour flight. The man in the middle seat was watching something on his phone earbuds, oblivious to everything around him. Beatrice had pulled out a paperback novel and was reading with the help of a small book light clipped to the pages. Simone pressed her fingertips against her temple, breathing slowly. The pain was getting worse, spreading from behind her eye across the left side of her skull, radiating down toward her jaw. Her heart began to beat faster. A cold sweat broke out across her forehead, dampening her hairline. She had been a physician before she became an executive. Internal medicine. 15 years of clinical practice before she transitioned to the business side of healthcare. She had diagnosed thousands of patients over the years, had learned to read the language of the body, to recognize the signs that something was wrong. She knew her own body better than anyone. This was not a tension headache. Her mind began to catalog the symptoms automatically, a habit from her years in medicine. Severe unilateral headache with sudden onset. Visual disturbances at the periphery of her vision, a slight blurring that came and went. Diaphoresis, the cold sweat that was now dampening her blouse beneath her blazer. Elevated heart rate. Possible autonomic dysfunction. The differential diagnosis ran through her mind like a checklist: migraine with aura, cluster headache, hypertensive crisis, subarachnoid hemorrhage, subdural hematoma. The last 2 made her blood run cold. She needed help. Simone reached up and pressed the call button above her seat. The small orange light blinked on a tiny beacon in the dimness of the cabin. She waited, her breathing careful, and controlled her hand still pressed against her temple. A minute passed. The light continued to blink. Simone looked around the cabin. The flight attendants were at the front of the plane preparing the beverage cart. They were laughing about something, their voices carrying faintly through the recycled air. One of them checked her phone. Another adjusted her hair in a small, compact mirror. 2 minutes passed. Simone pressed the button again, holding it longer this time, as if that would make a difference. Finally, a flight attendant appeared at the end of the row. She was young, probably mid-20s, with blonde hair pulled back in a tight ponytail, and a name tag that read Ashley. Her smile was practiced professional, the kind of smile that had been rehearsed in training sessions and deployed thousands of times. But there was an impatience in her eyes, the look of someone who had dealt with too many demanding passengers and had learned to protect herself with a wall of polite indifference. "Yes, ma'am. How can I help you?" Simone looked up at her, her voice steady despite the pain pulsing through her skull. "I'm experiencing severe symptoms, a sudden headache, visual disturbances, and I'm sweating. I'm a physician, and I believe I may be having a neurological event. I need medical assistance." Ashley's expression flickered. Something shifted behind her eyes. A flicker of doubt, a subtle hardening. Her smile remained, but it became tighter, more guarded. "A neurological event," she repeated, her voice slightly higher than before. "Yes." Simone kept her voice calm, professional. The same voice she had used with patients for years. The voice that conveyed authority without aggression, competence without condescension. "I need you to check if there's a doctor on board, and I may need the plane to divert if my condition worsens." Ashley glanced at the man in the middle seat, as if seeking confirmation that this woman was being unreasonable. He had removed one earbud and was watching the exchange with an expression that mixed annoyance with curiosity. He shrugged slightly, his body language saying, "I don't know what to tell you." Ashley turned back to Simone. "Ma'am, we're mid-flight right now. There's not a lot I can do. Can I get you some water? Maybe some aspirin?" Simone felt a flash of frustration, but she tamped it down. "I've already taken ibuprofen. It's not helping. This is not a normal headache. I am telling you that I am a doctor, and I am experiencing symptoms consistent with a potential stroke or hemorrhage." Ashley's eyes widened slightly, but not with concern. With something else. Skepticism. Maybe even annoyance. Her posture shifted almost imperceptibly, her weight moving to one hip, her arms crossing slightly across her chest. "Okay," she said slowly, drawing out the word. "I'll let the captain know. But unless you're actively having a seizure or something, there's really nothing we can do at 35,000 feet." She paused, and then added, "You might want to try to relax. Sometimes anxiety can make symptoms seem worse than they are." The words hit Simone like a slap. Anxiety. The implication was clear. This woman thought she was overreacting, thought she was making a scene, thought she was one of those passengers who demanded attention for imaginary ailments. "I'm asking you to take this seriously," Simone said, her voice still even, but with an edge now. This could become life-threatening. Ashley straightened up, her smile fading into something more neutral, more distant. "Ma'am, I am taking it seriously, but I have a whole plane of passengers to attend to. I'll check with the captain and see if there's a doctor on board." "Okay." Before Simone could respond, Ashley turned and walked away, her ponytail swinging behind her. Simone watched her go, her heart sinking. She knew that walk. She had seen it before. It was the walk of someone who had already made up their mind, who was going through the motions because protocol required it, but who had no intention of actually helping. Beatrice, the older woman in the aisle seat, leaned over slightly. "Dear, are you all right? You don't look well." Her voice was soft, concerned, and Simone felt a rush of gratitude for the simple kindness. "I'm not feeling well, no," Simone admitted. "I've asked for help, but I'm not sure it's coming." Beatrice frowned, her lined face creasing with worry. "That's not right. You should be helped. Do you want me to call someone I can press my button too? Maybe if both of us are calling, they'll pay more attention." Simone shook her head. "I already pressed the call button twice. The flight attendant said she would check with the captain, but even as she said the words, she wondered if Ashley would actually do anything. The way the young woman had looked at her, the doubt in her eyes, the slight hesitation before every response, the assumption unspoken but clear that Simone could not possibly be what she claimed to be. Simone had seen that look before. She had seen it her entire life. In classrooms where teachers assumed she needed extra help. In hospitals where patients demanded to see the real doctor. In boardrooms where men talked over her as if she were not there. The look that said, "You don't belong here." The look that said, "You must be mistaken about yourself." She leaned back in her seat and closed her eyes, trying to focus on her breathing. The pain was still there, pulsing with each heartbeat. She counted the seconds between pulses. 1, 2, 3. The rhythm was steady, but the intensity was growing. She needed to stay calm. She needed to monitor her own symptoms. She needed to be ready to advocate for herself again if no help came. But a part of her, a small and tired part, wondered if it would matter. Wondered if anyone would believe her. Wondered if she would die on this plane while people around her celebrated the coming of a new year. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind, as it often did in moments of crisis. You are enough, Simone. You have always been enough. Don't let anyone make you question that. But Eleanor Carter was gone dead for 3 years now, and Simone was alone at 35,000 feet, and the pain in her head was getting worse, and no one was coming to help. 15 minutes passed. Then 20. The pain behind Simone's eye had become a constant presence, a heavy weight that seemed to press against her skull from the inside. Her vision kept blurring the edges of the cabin, going soft and hazy before sharpening again. She was sweating now, her blouse damp against her back despite the recycled chill of the cabin air. She pressed the call button again. The light blinked orange, insistent and small. Simone watched it, her breathing careful and measured. The cabin around her continued as if nothing were wrong. Passengers dozed. Someone laughed at something on their screen. The flight attendants moved through the aisle collecting trash, distributing drinks, making small talk with passengers who wanted attention. But no one came to row 23. Another minute passed. Then 2. Then 3. The man in the middle seat had noticed her pressing the button. He shifted in his seat, pulling himself slightly away from her. His body language had changed. Earlier he had been merely dismissive. Now there was something else. Wariness. Maybe even fear. He was watching her out of the corner of his eye, the way you might watch a stray dog that had wandered too close. "You okay?" he asked, but his tone suggested he did not really want to know the answer. "No," Simone said. "I'm not." He stared at her for a moment, his eyes flicking down to her hand, which was still pressed against her temple. "You want me to call someone I already called?" 3 times. She could hear the frustration creeping into her own voice, and she forced herself to take a breath. "I need medical help." He nodded, but he did not press his own call button. He did not wave down a passing attendant. He did not offer to get up and find someone. He just sat there watching her with an expression that was hard to read, his laptop bag still clutched protectively against his hip. Finally, Ashley returned, but she was not alone. A male flight attendant walked beside her. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with close-cropped dark hair, and a name tag that read Chad. His expression was neutral, professional, but there was a hardness in his eyes that Simone recognized immediately. He was not here to help. He was here to manage a situation. "Ma'am," Chad said, stopping at the end of her row, "we understand you're not feeling well, but we've received some complaints from other passengers that you're being disruptive." Simone stared at him. The word landed like a blow. "Disruptive." "Yes, ma'am." Chad's voice was calm, the kind of calm that was designed to make her feel like she was the unreasonable one. "Some passengers have said you're acting erratically. One gentleman mentioned you might have been drinking." The man in the middle seat looked away, suddenly very interested in the seat back in front of him. His ears were red. "I have not been drinking," Simone said, her voice tight. I am having a medical emergency. I told your colleague that I am a physician and I am experiencing symptoms consistent with a serious neurological event. Ashley stood slightly behind Chad, her arms crossed. Her expression was skeptical, almost smug. Ma'am, if you were a doctor, wouldn't you know how to handle a headache? The words landed like a slap. Simone felt her jaw clench. She forced herself to breathe, to stay calm, to not give them the reaction they seemed to be expecting. This is not a headache, she said carefully, her voice low and deliberate. This is a sudden onset, severe headache, with visual disturbances and autonomic symptoms. I am a physician. I have been practicing medicine for over 15 years. I am the CEO of MedTech Solutions, a medical technology company, and I am telling you that I need help. Chad shifted his weight, his hands moving to his hips in a posture that was clearly meant to intimidate. Ma'am, we're doing everything we can, but you need to calm down. You're making the other passengers uncomfortable. I'm making them uncomfortable, Simone repeated, her voice rising slightly, despite her efforts to stay calm. I am sitting in my seat, asking for medical assistance, and I am making them uncomfortable. Beatrice, the older woman in the aisle seat, leaned forward. Excuse me, she said, her voice firm, despite its quaver, but this woman clearly needs help. Can't you see she's not well? Her face is pale. She's sweating. Something is wrong. I've been sitting here watching her suffer for 20 minutes and no one has done anything. Chad barely glanced at her. Ma'am, please stay out of this. Beatrice's face flushed with indignation, but she sat back, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her eyes met Simone's, and in them Simone saw something she had not expected. Anger and solidarity. Chad turned back to Simone. Look, he said, his voice dropping lower. We've had passengers like you before. You want attention. You want special treatment. But we're not going to let you disrupt this flight for everyone else. Passengers like me. Simone repeated the words cold and flat. You know what I mean. She did know. She knew exactly what he meant. And for a moment she was too stunned to speak. Simone felt something warm and wet on her upper lip. She reached up and touched it, and her fingers came away red. Blood. She was bleeding from her nose. The cabin seemed to tilt slightly. The edges of her vision wavered. She looked down at her fingers at the bright red smear against her dark skin, and something inside her went cold. This was not anxiety. This was not a headache. This was her body failing. I'm bleeding, she said, her voice quiet now, almost a whisper. Please, I need help. Chad and Ashley exchanged a glance. It was a quick look, barely a second, but Simone caught it. They were not concerned. They were annoyed. They were calculating how to deal with this problem, this woman who would not stop asking for things. The man in the middle seat saw the blood too. His eyes widened, and he jerked back, pressing himself against the armrest. What the hell, he said loudly, his voice carrying through the quiet cabin. Is she on drugs or something? She's bleeding everywhere. No, Simone said, but her voice was weakening. The pain was becoming overwhelming, a roaring pressure inside her skull that made it hard to think, hard to speak. I am having a medical emergency. Ashley took a step back, her hand moving to cover her nose and mouth as if Simone were contagious. Oh my God, she muttered. What is wrong with her? Ma'am, Chad said, his voice harder now, less patient. If you can't control yourself, we're going to have security meet the plane when we land. Those words, that threat, spoken to a woman bleeding from her nose, a woman who had asked for help 3 times, a woman who was slowly losing consciousness. Simone reached for the leather bag beneath the seat in front of her. She needed her phone. She needed to call someone. Anyone. Her fingers fumbled with the clasp, but her hands were shaking too badly. She could not make them work. The bag. Her mother's bag. The bag that had witnessed every slight, every dismissal, every quiet indignity of Eleanor Carter's career. And now, it was witnessing this. Mom Simone whispered, though she did not know why. "Mom, I'm sorry." A drop of blood fell from her nose onto the leather bag, staining the worn caramel surface with a dark crimson spot. The blood spread slowly, seeping into the grain of the leather. The cabin lights seemed to dim further, though Simone knew that was not real. It was her vision failing. The pressure in her head was becoming unbearable, a crushing weight that pushed against her consciousness. She heard laughter from somewhere behind her. A group of passengers celebrating, cheering as they counted down to midnight in their seats. Someone had brought small bottles of champagne and corks were popping. The plane was full of people happy to be heading home, happy to be alive, happy to be welcoming a new year. And Simone Carter was dying. She slumped forward, her forehead pressing against the seat back in front of her. The last thing she heard before darkness took her was the sound of cheering and the distant muffled sound of Happy New Year being shouted in unison. Then nothing. The first voice that cut through the darkness was not one Simone recognized. It was deep, authoritative, and sharp with anger. "I'm a doctor. This woman needs immediate help. Move, now." Simone felt hands on her shoulders, gentle but firm, easing her back against her seat. Her eyelids fluttered. The world came back in fragments, blurred lights, the drone of engines, a face leaning over her, gray hair, sharp eyes, concern. "Ma'am, can you hear me? Can you tell me your name?" She tried to speak, but her voice came out as a croak. The pain was still there, monstrous and heavy, but there was something else now. Someone was helping. Finally, someone was helping. The man above her was white, perhaps in his early 60s, with silver hair and a close-trimmed beard. His eyes were sharp, focused, and deeply concerned. He was pressing 2 fingers against her wrist, checking her pulse. His touch was professional, practiced. The touch of someone who had done this thousands of times. "Doctor Richard Hayes," he said, his voice steady. "I'm a neurosurgeon from Emory University Hospital. I was sitting in first class and I heard there was a commotion. You're going to be okay. I'm here now." Simone blinked, her vision slowly clearing. Behind Dr. Hayes, she could see Chad and Ashley standing a few feet away. Their expressions had changed. The annoyance was gone, replaced by something else. Fear. Confusion. The dawning realization that they might have made a terrible mistake. What happened to her, Dr. Hayes asked, not looking at them. His attention was entirely on Simone, his fingers now pressing gently against the sides of her neck, checking for swelling, for pulse abnormalities. "She said she had a headache," Ashley said quickly, her voice higher than before. "We were going to check on her. We were just about to get help." Dr. Hayes turned his head slowly, and even in her diminished state, Simone saw the fury that crossed his face. It was cold, controlled, the kind of anger that came from years of seeing incompetence and negligence cause suffering. A headache. This woman has been bleeding from her nose for God knows how long. Her blood pressure is dangerously low. Her pupils are unequal. She's exhibiting classic signs of a possible intracranial hemorrhage. He straightened up, his voice rising just enough to carry to the passengers in the surrounding rows. "And you left her sitting here. You threatened to call security on her." "We didn't know." Chad started, but his voice faltered. "You didn't want to know." Dr. Hayes cut him off. There was no room for argument in his tone. "How long was she asking for help? How long did you ignore her silence? How long, I don't know, maybe 20, 30 minutes? Ashley admitted, her eyes dropping to the floor. Dr. Hayes stared at her for a long moment, his jaw tight. Then he turned back to Simone. He pulled a pen light from his pocket and shined it into her eyes, checking her pupil responses. His movements were quick and precise, the muscle memory of decades of practice. "Ma'am, can you tell me your name, Simone?" she managed. "Simone Carter." "Simone, I need you to stay with me. We're going to get you help. Can you tell me what symptoms you've been experiencing?" She took a breath, forcing her mind to work despite the pain. Severe headache, left side, sudden onset, visual disturbances, cold sweats, heart racing, nausea. Dr. Hayes nodded, his expression grim. He looked back at the flight attendants. "Get me the captain on the intercom. Now. This plane needs to divert to the nearest airport with a trauma center." Chad hesitated, his posture defensive. "Sir, we can't just divert the plane for every medical issue. There are protocols. The captain has to make that decision based on company policy." Dr. Hayes stood up to his full height, which was considerable. "I am a board-certified neurosurgeon with 35 years of experience. I am the chief of neurosurgery at one of the top hospitals in the Southeast. This woman is showing signs of a possible subdural hematoma or subarachnoid hemorrhage. If she does not receive emergency medical care within the next hour, she will die." He took a step closer to Chad, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous tone. "So you are going to get me the captain, and you are going to divert this plane to the nearest hospital. Do you understand me?" Chad's face went pale. He nodded once, then turned and hurried toward the front of the plane, nearly tripping over a passenger's bag in his haste. Ashley remained, her hands clasped in front of her, her expression a mixture of guilt and something that might have been fear. "I didn't know she was really sick," she said quietly. "She didn't look that bad. She just seemed like, I don't know, she was being difficult." Dr. Hayes did not respond. He was already back at Simone's side, checking her blood pressure with a manual cuff from the plane's emergency medical kit. Beatrice had moved into the aisle, giving him space to work, her weathered face creased with worry. "Is she going to be all right?" Beatrice asked. "I don't know," Dr. Hayes said honestly, "but I'm going to do everything I can." The man in the middle seat, the one who had accused Simone of being on drugs, had pressed himself as far away from her as physically possible. His face was red, his expression uncomfortable. He did not offer to help. He did not apologize. He just sat there watching, waiting for this to be over. Dr. Hayes noticed. Everyone noticed. "You," Dr. Hayes said, pointing at him. "Move, now! I need this space to work." The man scrambled out of his seat and fled down the aisle without a word. Simone felt a strange calm settle over her. The panic was fading, replaced by a kind of detached awareness. She was hurt. She was in danger, but someone was finally helping. Someone believed her. "Thank you," she whispered. Dr. Hayes looked at her, and for a moment his professional mask slipped. She saw the anger there, the sorrow, the frustration. He knew what had happened. He knew why she had been ignored. "Don't thank me," he said quietly. "This never should have happened. You should have been helped the first time you asked." The captain's voice came over the intercom a few minutes later. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Morrison. We're diverting to Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport for a medical emergency. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We should be on the ground in approximately 40 minutes. I apologize for any inconvenience this may cause to your travel plans." Murmurs rippled through the cabin. Some passengers groaned with annoyance. Others craned their necks to see what was happening. A baby began to cry somewhere in the back of the plane. Dr. Hayes stayed by Simone's side, monitoring her vital signs, keeping her conscious. He asked her questions. What year was it? What city did she live in? What was her daughter's name? How old was she? What did she do for work? Simple questions designed to assess her cognitive function, to keep her engaged, to keep her present. Naomi Simone said, "Her name is Naomi. She's 15. She's waiting for me at home. We were going to watch the ball drop together. Tell me about her. She's brilliant, smarter than I was at her age. She wants to be an engineer, or maybe a lawyer. She changes her mind every week." Simone's lips curved into a small smile despite the pain. "She's stubborn, like her grandmother was. Like me." Dr. Hayes smiled. "Stubborn is good. Stubborn keeps you alive. Keep talking. Tell me more." She loves Thai food, pad Thai extra spicy, and she pretends she doesn't like rom-coms, but I always catch her watching them when she thinks I'm not looking. She's been learning to cook. She made me breakfast last month for my birthday. Burned the toast and undercooked the eggs, but it was the best meal I've ever had. The plane descended through the clouds, the cabin shaking slightly with turbulence. Simone watched the window, though she could not see much from her angle. Just glimpses of lights below a city spreading out like a circuit board in the darkness. Dallas. Almost there. "Stay with me, Simone," Dr. Hayes said. "We're almost there. Keep talking. I'm trying." When the wheels touched down, Dr. Hayes was already on his feet, shouting instructions to the paramedics who rushed on board as soon as the door opened. They moved quickly, efficiently, strapping Simone to a stretcher and wheeling her off the plane. As she passed through the jetway, Simone caught a glimpse of Ashley standing near the galley, her face pale, her eyes wide. The young woman opened her mouth as if to say something, but no words came out. Simone did not look at her. She did not have the energy for anger. Not now. She closed her eyes and let herself be carried away. The ambulance ride was a blur of sirens and fluorescent lights. Paramedics spoke in clipped, efficient phrases. Blood pressure 90/60 and dropping. Possible intracranial bleed. Notify the ER. Tell them we need a surgical team standing by. Get neurosurgery on the line. Simone drifted in and out of consciousness, the world fading and sharpening around her like a radio station losing signal. She thought about Naomi, about her daughter waiting at home, probably checking her phone every few minutes, wondering why her mother had not texted, wondering why the flight tracker showed the plane had landed in Dallas instead of Los Angeles. "I'm sorry," she thought. "I'm sorry, baby. I'm coming home. I promise." She did not know if she was lying. At the hospital, they moved fast, CT scan. Then another. Then an MRI. Doctors and nurses surrounded her, their faces blurring together. She heard fragments of conversation. Subdural hematoma confirmed. Left side. Significant bleeding. Pressure building. We need to operate now. Get the OR ready. Someone was holding her hand. She looked up and saw a nurse, a young black woman with kind eyes and a calm voice. "Dr. Carter," the nurse said softly. "We're going to take care of you. You're going to be okay. I need you to stay with me." Simone blinked. "You know who I am." The nurse nodded, squeezing her hand gently. "Everyone in this hospital knows who you are. Your diagnostic software saved my grandmother's life 2 years ago. She had a stroke at home alone, and your algorithm caught it when the paramedics used the tablet. They got her to the hospital in time. She's alive because of you, so now it's our turn to help you." Tears welled in Simone's eyes, though she did not know if they were from relief or exhaustion or something else entirely. The weight of everything that had happened pressed down on her, and for a moment she felt like she might break. "Thank you," she whispered. The nurse smiled. "Thank you. Now rest. We've got you." Simone closed her eyes and let the darkness take her again. But this time it was not the darkness of fear. It was the darkness of trust. She was in good hands. The surgery lasted 4 hours. When Simone woke, she was in a private room. The walls painted a soft blue, the curtains half drawn against the morning light. Her head was wrapped in bandages, and there was an IV in her arm. Monitors beeped softly, tracking her heartbeat, her blood pressure, her oxygen levels. She blinked, trying to orient herself. The last thing she remembered was the nurse's kind face, the pressure of her hand. "Mom." The voice came from beside her. Simone turned her head, wincing at the stiffness in her neck, and saw Naomi sitting in a chair, her face streaked with dried tears, her eyes red and swollen. The girl looked exhausted. Her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, her clothes rumpled from sleeping in them. Naomi Simone breathed. "Baby." Naomi launched herself out of the chair and wrapped her arms around her mother, careful of the bandages, the tubes, the fragile machinery keeping her alive. "Mom, I was so scared. I got a call from the hospital in Dallas, and they said you were in surgery and I didn't know what was happening. And Dad flew me out here on the first flight this morning, and I thought I was going to lose you." She could not finish. The sobs took over. Simone held her daughter as tightly as her weakened arms would allow. "I'm here," she whispered, her own tears falling now. "I'm okay. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." They stayed like that for a long time. Mother and daughter. Survivor and witness. The morning light crept across the floor, painting golden stripes on the linoleum. Simone's ex-husband, Daniel, stood in the doorway, his expression a mixture of relief and exhaustion. He and Simone had divorced 5 years ago, amicably, and he had remarried, but he had never stopped caring about her. When Naomi had called him hysterical, he had dropped everything and put her on the next flight to Dallas. "You scared us," he said quietly. "I scared myself," Simone admitted. A doctor came in later, a middle-aged woman with graying temples and a no-nonsense demeanor. She introduced herself as Dr. Patel, the neurosurgeon, who had operated on Simone. "Dr. Carter," she said, sitting down in the chair beside the bed, "you are very lucky to be alive." "Lucky?" The word echoed in Simone's mind. Was it luck? Or was it the intervention of a stranger, a doctor who had heard her struggling and decided to act? You had a subdural hematoma, Dr. Patel explained. Bleeding between your brain and your skull. The pressure was building rapidly. Another 30 minutes, maybe less, and you would have had permanent brain damage. Another hour, and you would have died. Simone nodded slowly. The information was not new. She had suspected as much from her own symptoms. But hearing it confirmed, hearing it stated so plainly, was still a shock. How did it happen? Naomi asked. She was sitting on the edge of her mother's bed, now holding her hand, refusing to let go. Dr. Patel shook her head. We're not entirely sure. It could have been a small vessel that ruptured due to stress dehydration altitude changes on the plane. Sometimes these things happen spontaneously without warning. The important thing is that you got help in time. Barely in time, Simone said quietly. Dr. Patel met her eyes. Yes. Barely. After the doctor left, Simone lay in silence for a long time. Naomi had fallen asleep in the chair beside her, exhausted from the ordeal. Daniel had gone to find coffee, giving them space. Simone thought about the flight, about the pain, the bleeding, the call button that went unanswered, about Ashley's skeptical expression and Chad's threats, about the man in the middle seat who had accused her of being on drugs, about the 30 minutes she had spent asking for help while everyone around her assumed she was the problem. She thought about Dr. Hayes, a stranger who had heard her struggling and decided to act, who had believed her when no one else would, who had saved her life. And she thought about her mother. Eleanor Carter had been a physician for 34 years. She had worked in hospitals where the white doctors called her nurse no matter how many times she corrected them. She had endured patients who refused to be treated by a black woman, who questioned her credentials, who asked to see a real doctor. She had watched younger, less experienced white colleagues get promoted over her, had seen her ideas credited to others, had swallowed her anger so many times that it became a permanent part of who she was. Eleanor had never fought back. She had never filed complaints, never made waves, never demanded to be seen. She had believed that if she just worked hard enough, if she just proved herself over and over again, things would get better. They never did. And then, at 67, Eleanor Carter had a heart attack in the hospital where she worked. The staff did not recognize her at first. She was wearing a patient gown, not her white coat. By the time they realized who she was, precious minutes had been lost. She died 2 days later. Simone had been at her bedside, holding her hand, watching the monitors flatline, begging her to stay. Now, lying in her own hospital bed, Simone looked at the worn leather bag sitting on the chair where Naomi had placed it. The bag her mother had carried for 30 years. The bag with a fresh bloodstain on its surface, dark and permanent. "Mom," she whispered too softly for anyone to hear. "I'm not going to let this go." 3 weeks later, Simone was home in Los Angeles, recovering slowly. The headaches had faded to a dull ache that came and went. Her vision had returned to normal. The doctors were optimistic about a full recovery, though they cautioned her to take it slow to avoid stress, to give her brain time to heal. But Simone could not rest. Not yet. The airline had sent an email. She read it on her phone, sitting in her living room, a cup of tea, cooling on the table beside her. "Dear Dr. Carter," the email began. We are sorry to hear about the medical incident that occurred during your recent flight with Air National. We apologize for any inconvenience this may have caused and hope that you are recovering well. As a gesture of goodwill, please accept this voucher for one complimentary round-trip ticket to any domestic destination. We value your business and look forward to serving you again in the future. Inconvenience. Simone read the word 3 times. Her jaw tightened. Her hands began to shake. They left me bleeding for 30 minutes, she said aloud. They accused me of being on drugs. They threatened to have me arrested, and they are calling it an inconvenience. Naomi looked up from her homework. She was sitting across the room, her laptop open, her textbooks spread around her. What did they say? Simone handed her the phone. Naomi read the email, her expression darkening with each line. This is garbage, Naomi said. This is absolute garbage. She looked at her mother, her eyes hard. Are you going to let them get away with this? Simone looked at the leather bag sitting in its usual spot by the door. The bloodstain was still visible, a dark reminder of everything that had happened. She thought about her mother, about all the times Eleanor had been dismissed, ignored, overlooked, about all the anger she had swallowed, all the battles she had never fought, about the way she had died, unrecognized, unknown, just another patient in a gown. No. Simone, said her voice stronger now. Not this time. The law offices of Webb and Associates occupied the top floor of a glass tower in downtown Los Angeles. The view was spectacular, sweeping vistas of the city sprawling toward the mountains in the distance, but Simone barely noticed. She was focused on the man sitting across the conference table from her. Marcus Webb was 53 years old, with close-cropped gray hair and a face that had seen more courtrooms than most people saw restaurants. He was one of the most respected civil rights attorneys in California, maybe in the country. He had won cases against police departments, corporations, and government agencies. He had built his career on holding the powerful accountable, and he was listening to Simone's story with an intensity that made her feel for the first time since that night on the plane, truly heard. When she finished speaking, Marcus was silent for a long moment. He leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled beneath his chin, his eyes distant. You're saying they ignored you for 30 minutes, he said slowly. Even after you told them you were a physician. Even after you began bleeding. Yes. And when a white doctor intervened, they immediately took action. Yes. Marcus nodded, his expression unreadable. Dr. Carter, I've been doing this work for almost 30 years. I've heard a lot of stories. But this one... He shook his head. This one is different. How so? Because this isn't just about one flight or one set of employees or one bad decision. He leaned forward, his eyes meeting hers. This is about a system that decides consciously or unconsciously whose lives are worth saving and whose are not. A system that sees a black woman asking for help and assumes she must be lying or exaggerating or trying to get something for nothing. A system that nearly killed you because it couldn't imagine that you might be telling the truth. Simone felt tears pricking at her eyes, but she blinked them back. So, what do we do? Marcus smiled, but it was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a man who had been waiting for this fight for a long time. We hold them accountable. We make them answer for what they did. And we make sure it never happens to anyone else. The investigation took 3 months. Marcus and his team dug into Air National's records with the tenacity of archaeologists uncovering a buried city. They submitted subpoenas, interviewed witnesses, and analyzed years of customer complaint data. What they found was damning. 47 complaints of racial discrimination over the past 5 years. Complaints from passengers who had been treated differently because of their skin color. Complaints from employees who had been passed over for promotions while less qualified white colleagues advanced. Complaints that had been dismissed, settled quietly, or simply ignored. Ashley Brennan and Chad Morrison. The 2 flight attendants who had handled Simone's case had a combined total of 12 prior complaints against them. Ashley had been reported for telling a black family to move to the back of the plane because their presence was making other passengers uncomfortable. Chad had been accused of using excessive force while removing a Hispanic passenger who had allegedly been intoxicated, though blood tests later showed the man had not had a single drop of alcohol. Neither of them had faced any disciplinary action. Neither of them had even been required to attend additional training. The complaints had been filed, acknowledged, and forgotten. This is a pattern Marcus said during one of their strategy sessions. Not an accident, not a few bad apples. A pattern. He assembled a team of experts, medical professionals who could testify about the severity of Simone's condition and the critical importance of the time that had been lost. Aviation specialists who could explain the protocols that should have been followed and how flagrantly they had been violated. Psychologists who could speak to the phenomenon of implicit bias, the unconscious assumptions that shape how people are treated based on their race, their gender, their appearance. And then there was Dr. Richard Hayes, the neurosurgeon who had saved Simone's life, agreed to testify without hesitation. When Marcus asked him why Dr. Hayes was quiet for a long moment, "I've been a doctor for 35 years, he finally said. "I've saved a lot of lives. I've lost a lot, too. But that night I realized something. I wasn't just saving a life, I was witnessing a failure of the system, a failure of humanity." He looked at Simone, his eyes heavy with something that might have been sorrow. "I couldn't look away, and I won't stay silent." The lawsuit was filed in federal court 6 months after the incident. The complaint ran to 53 pages detailing everything that had happened on Flight 847, the history of discrimination at Air National, and the systemic failures that had nearly cost Simone her life. The media picked it up immediately. Black CEO left bleeding while airline staff threatened to remove her. The headlines were everywhere. Twitter exploded. News programs ran segments. Advocacy groups issued statements of support. Politicians weighed in. The story had touched something deep in the public consciousness, something that went beyond one woman on one flight. And Air National panicked. Their initial response was predictable. They issued a statement expressing regret for any inconvenience Dr. Carter had experienced. They announced that the employees involved had been placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation. They promised to review their training protocols and implement new safeguards. But Marcus was not interested in their promises. "This isn't about getting an apology," he told Simone during one of their strategy sessions. "This is about accountability. Real accountability. The kind that changes behavior. The kind that makes sure this never happens to anyone else. Simone nodded, her jaw set. Whatever it takes. The trial began on a Monday in September. The courtroom was packed, reporters filling the gallery, cameras waiting outside. Simone sat at the plaintiff's table dressed in a simple navy suit, her mother's leather bag on the floor beside her. The bloodstain was still visible, a silent witness to everything that had happened. Air National had assembled a formidable legal team, 4 partners from one of the largest corporate law firms in the country, all of them in expensive suits with practiced expressions of confident concern. Their strategy was clear from the opening statements. Minimize. Deflect. Blame the victim. Your Honor. The lead attorney. A silver-haired man named Harrison Cole began this case is a tragedy of miscommunication. Our employees were acting in good faith, following protocols designed to ensure the safety and comfort of all passengers. They could not have known that Dr. Carter's condition was as serious as it turned out to be. They are not medical professionals. They are flight attendants doing their best in difficult circumstances. Marcus stood slowly buttoning his jacket as he approached the podium. He let the silence stretch for a moment before he spoke. Miscommunication. He repeated his voice, carrying to every corner of the room. Let me tell you what communication looked like on Flight 847. A woman, a physician, told your employees 3 times that she was having a medical emergency. She used clinical terminology. She described her symptoms with precision. She was clear, coherent, and specific. And your employees responded by accusing her of being on drugs, by threatening to have her removed by security, by leaving her bleeding from her nose for 30 minutes while they attended to other passengers. He paused, letting the words sink in. That is not miscommunication. That is discrimination. That is negligence. That is what happens when a system decides that some lives matter less than others. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Witness after witness took the stand. Dr. Hayes described what he had seen when he first approached Simone, the blood on her face, the pallor of her skin, the way the flight attendants had been standing over her with expressions of annoyance rather than concern. I have been a physician for 35 years, Dr. Hayes testified. I have seen medical emergencies handled well, and I have seen them handled poorly. What I witnessed on that plane was not just poor handling. It was willful neglect. It was a choice to dismiss a patient's symptoms because of assumptions about who she was and what she deserved. And it almost killed her. Medical experts explained the severity of a subdural hematoma, the narrow window for treatment, the likelihood that Simone would have died if the plane had not diverted when it did. One neurosurgeon estimated that she had been less than 45 minutes from irreversible brain damage or death. Aviation experts testified about FAA regulations requiring airlines to respond to medical emergencies, about the protocols that should have been followed, about the training that should have been provided. They explained that Air National had consistently underinvested in medical emergency training, prioritizing cost savings over passenger safety. And then Simone herself took the stand. She told her story simply, without embellishment. She described the pain that had woken her from sleep, the blurred vision, the cold sweat. She described pressing the call button, waiting for help, asking for assistance. She described the way Ashley had looked at her, the dismissiveness in her voice, the assumption that a black woman in economy class could not possibly be a physician. I wasn't asking for special treatment, Simone said, her voice steady. I was asking to be seen as a human being. I was asking for the same care that would have been given to anyone else. But they didn't see me as anyone else. They saw a black woman making demands, and they decided I must be the problem. The defense attorney, Harrison Cole, cross-examined her aggressively. He questioned whether she had really been as clear as she claimed. He suggested that she might have been exaggerating her symptoms. He implied that her perception of the flight attendant's behavior might have been colored by her own biases. Dr. Carter, he said, his voice dripping with false concern. Isn't it possible that you were simply having a bad headache? And that in your distress you misinterpreted the flight attendant's attempts to help you as hostility? Simone looked at him steadily. Mr. Cole, I am a physician. I have diagnosed thousands of patients over the course of my career. I know the difference between a headache and a medical emergency, and I know the difference between help and hostility. What I experienced on that plane was not help. It was dismissal. It was disbelief. And it nearly cost me my life. Cole had no response. The jury was out for less than 4 hours. When they returned, the courtroom fell silent. The foreman, a middle-aged black woman with graying hair and steady hands, stood to read the verdict in the matter of Carter versus Air National Airlines. On the count of discrimination, we find in favor of the plaintiff. On the count of negligence, we find in favor of the plaintiff. On the count of reckless endangerment, we find in favor of the plaintiff. The courtroom erupted. Reporters scrambled for the exits, rushing to file their stories. Advocacy groups released statements. Social media exploded. But Simone sat still. She looked at Marcus, who was smiling for the first time in weeks. She looked at Naomi, who was crying in the gallery, her hand pressed to her mouth. She looked at the leather bag on the floor beside her, the bloodstain still visible. She did not feel triumph. She felt relief and exhaustion. And something else. Something that felt almost like peace. The damages were substantial. $15 million in compensation, the largest settlement in airline discrimination history. But more importantly, the court issued an injunction requiring Air National to completely overhaul its training protocols, to implement mandatory bias awareness programs, and to establish an independent oversight committee to review all complaints of discrimination. It was not just a verdict. It was a mandate for change. In the weeks following the trial, other lawsuits emerged. Passengers who had experienced similar treatment, employees who had witnessed discrimination and been afraid to speak. The trickle became a flood, and Air National found itself facing dozens of cases, each one adding to the weight of evidence against them. Their stock price plummeted, bookings dropped, partner airlines distanced themselves, insurance premiums skyrocketed, investors fled. 18 months after Simone's verdict, Air National filed for bankruptcy. The news broke on a Tuesday morning. Simone was in her office at MedTech Solutions, reviewing quarterly reports, when her assistant knocked on the door. "Have you seen the news?" Simone looked up, frowning. "What news?" Her assistant held out a tablet. The headline filled the screen. Air National declares bankruptcy amid discrimination lawsuits. Simone stared at the words for a long moment. She did not feel triumphant. She did not feel vindicated. She felt tired and sad. and strangely empty. She thought about all the people who would lose their jobs. The flight attendants, the pilots, the mechanics, the customer service representatives. Thousands of people whose lives were about to be upended because of decisions made by leaders who had chosen profits over principles, convenience over compassion. She thought about Ashley and Chad. They had been fired shortly after the trial, of course. The last she had heard, Ashley was working at a retail store in Phoenix, and Chad had moved to Florida. She did not know if they had learned anything from what had happened, if they had examined their own assumptions and found them wanting. She hoped so, but she doubted it. And she thought about her mother. Eleanor Carter had never lived to see this day. She had died believing that the system would never change, that the indignities she had suffered were simply the price of being who she was. She had never filed a complaint, never raised her voice, never demanded to be seen. But Simone had. And because of that, things were different now. Not perfect, not even close to perfect, but different. The conversation had shifted. The awareness had grown. The rules had changed at least a little. It was not enough, but it was a start. 1 year later, Simone stood at a podium in the grand ballroom of the Los Angeles Convention Center. The room was filled with healthcare professionals, executives, advocates, and journalists. The annual MedTech Summit had drawn a record crowd, and Simone had been invited to deliver the keynote address. She wore a simple black dress, elegant but understated. Her hair was natural, framing her face in soft curls, and in her hands she held her mother's leather bag. The bloodstain was still there, faded now, but visible if you looked closely. She had never had it cleaned. She never would. "Good morning," she began, her voice clear and strong. "I want to tell you a story." She told them about the flight, about the pain, the bleeding, the call button that went unanswered, about the accusations and the threats, about Dr. Hayes, who had heard her struggling and chosen to act, about the trial, the verdict, the aftermath. And then she told them about her mother. "My mother was a physician for 34 years, Simone said, her voice softening. She was brilliant, compassionate, dedicated. She saved hundreds of lives, and she spent her entire career being dismissed, overlooked, and underestimated. She never fought back. She believed that if she just worked hard enough, things would get better. But they didn't." She paused, lifting the leather bag so the audience could see it. This was her bag. She carried it every day for 30 years. It witnessed every slight, every insult, every moment when she was made to feel less than what she was. And then on a plane heading home for New Year's Eve, it witnessed what happened to me. My blood is still on this bag. I've never cleaned it. I never will. The room was silent. Not a phone buzzed, not a chair creaked. I used to wonder why my mother never spoke up. Simone continued. I used to think she was afraid. But now I understand. She wasn't afraid. She was exhausted. Exhausted from fighting battles that never seemed to end. Exhausted from explaining her worth to people who refused to see it. Exhausted from carrying the weight of a system that was designed to break her. She looked out at the audience, her eyes moving from face to face. But I am not exhausted. Not anymore. Because I learned something on that plane. I learned that silence does not protect us. Politeness does not save us. The only thing that changes the system is refusing to accept it. It's standing up even when you're bleeding. It's speaking out even when no one wants to listen. It's demanding to be seen as fully human even when the world tells you that you are not. She set the bag down on the podium, her hands resting on its worn surface. This bag is more than leather and brass. It's a reminder of what my mother endured, a reminder of what I survived, and a reminder of what we still have to do. Because this fight isn't just about one flight or one airline or one lawsuit. It's about every person who has been ignored, dismissed, or endangered because of the color of their skin. It's about every time someone looked at another human being and decided consciously or unconsciously that their life was worth less. She lifted her chin, her voice rising. My mother carried this bag for 30 years, and she never got to see justice. But I carry it now, and I will not be silent. I will not be polite. I will not accept a system that treats some lives as expendable. And neither should you. The applause started slowly, then built to a roar. People rose to their feet, clapping, cheering, some of them wiping tears from their eyes. Simone stood at the podium, the bag at her side, and let the moment wash over her. She was not doing this for the applause. She was not doing it for the recognition. She was doing it because it was right. Because her mother had deserved better. Because she had deserved better. Because everyone deserved better. After the speech, as the crowd began to disperse, a young woman approached Simone. She was in her early 20s, with dark skin and nervous eyes, wearing the uniform of a hotel employee. Dr. Carter, she said quietly, I just wanted to thank you. Simone smiled. For what? The young woman hesitated, then spoke in a rush. I work here, as housekeeping. And sometimes the guests, they treat me like I'm not even there. Like I don't matter. Like I'm invisible. They look through me like I'm furniture, and I always just take it. I don't say anything. I just keep my head down and do my job. But listening to you today, she paused, swallowing hard. You made me feel like maybe I don't have to take it. Maybe I can speak up too. Maybe my voice matters. Simone reached out and took the young woman's hand. She squeezed it gently. You can, she said. And you should. Your voice matters. Your life matters. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Don't let anyone make you feel invisible. You deserve to be seen. You deserve to be heard. You deserve to be treated with dignity. And if anyone tells you different, you look them in the eye, and you tell them they're wrong. The young woman nodded, blinking back tears. Then she smiled a small, hesitant smile, and walked away. Simone watched her go. Then she picked up her mother's bag, slung it over her shoulder, and walked out of the ballroom. The sun was setting over Los Angeles, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Simone stood on the terrace outside the convention center, the city spread out before her, and breathed in the evening air. She thought about everything that had happened. The pain, the fear, the anger, the fight, the victory. She thought about her mother, who had never gotten to see this day, who had carried her burdens in silence, believing that was the only way, who had died before she could see her daughter stand up and say enough. And she thought about Naomi, who was waiting for her at home, probably already ordering Thai food and queuing up something on Netflix. Her daughter, her reason, her future. Simone smiled. It was a small smile, tired but genuine. She had not changed the world. Not yet. But she had changed something. She had stood up when it would have been easier to stay down. She had spoken when it would have been safer to be silent. She had fought when the odds were against her. And she had won. Not just the lawsuit. Not just the money. She had won something more important. She had won the right to be seen, the right to be heard, the right to matter. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from Naomi. "Mom, where are you? I'm starving and the delivery guy just got here. I ordered extra spring rolls because I know you'll eat all of mine. Hurry up." Simone laughed a real laugh, the first one in what felt like a long time. She typed back a quick reply. "On my way. Don't eat all the spring rolls. Save me some sticky rice, too." She took one last look at the sunset, at the city, at the sky. Then she turned and walked toward her car, her mother's bag over her shoulder, the bloodstain facing the fading light. Behind her, the convention center hummed with activity. People were networking, exchanging business cards, discussing the day's presentations. Life was continuing as it always did. But somewhere in that crowd, a young woman in a housekeeping uniform was standing a little taller. And somewhere in the city, a mother was going home to her daughter. And somewhere in the collective consciousness of a nation, a conversation was shifting ever so slightly toward something better. This isn't just about one flight. It's about a system that decides whose lives are worth saving based on the color of their skin. It's about who gets believed and who gets dismissed. It's about whose pain is taken seriously and whose pain is ignored. If this story made you feel something, share it. Because the only way we change the system is by refusing to stay silent. Every voice matters. Every story counts. And sometimes the person who stands up changes everything, not just for themselves, but for everyone who comes after. The bag Simone carries belonged to her mother. The blood stain on it will never wash out, but that stain is not just a mark of pain. It is a mark of survival. It is proof that she was there, that she mattered, that she refused to disappear. And now she carries it forward. For her mother. For her daughter. For every person who has ever been told that their pain does not matter. It does. It always did. And now the world knows it too.